an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Raybearer, all of Part 4. All of it. In this section, well, Ashleigh figures out what her belly song is. And it turns out that it is essentially sacrificing herself on behalf of a bunch of innocent children. And I really don't think it gets much better than that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Everybody in the chat is talking about how it's going to be a marathon and a long one. It's not going to be any longer than usual. It's just going to be as full as it can possibly be. I'm going to try not to tangent too much, except for a couple places where a tangent is absolutely required. And I'm not going to go beat by beat on every single solitary plot point. But obviously, we've got some really big events to cover here. So, the biggest event is, first off, Dio knew. That's like not the biggest, but for me, it was the biggest surprise, I think, out of everything. Like a lot of the other things I sort of was thinking might shake out the way they did, Mbali being not one of them, but I had no idea Dio knew. And the fact that he knew makes him seem like so much kinder and even better a person than I already thought. Writing a good person is really hard to do when you are meant to be seeing them from the outside and when they are supposed to be somebody who's in a position of power. It can be really difficult to make them seem genuinely good and not simply like naive or maybe just a little bit foolish, to be honest. And while there is a sort of naivety to Dio, it's not in the sense that he seems to be ignorant of what the world is. He just chooses to see the best in people. And I love that when he talks to Ashleigh about how, like, we are supposed to be a team, essentially what he's saying is, like, you're the planner. You're the logical one. You think about actual statecraft. I am the emotional one. I consider the people and individuals and have mercy in this, in a different kind of way. And that is how we will complement each other. And I just keep coming back to how beautiful it is to see him being receptive to her talent. The fact that she has the ray, also not a surprise. He suspected it and again was not threatened by it. Dio is straight up like MVP in a lot of ways for me. Because if he had shown any feelings of reluctance or of any kind, all of this could have gone a completely different way. It all hinges on how he chooses to handle it, unfortunately, because that is how the power structure is balanced. It's kind of completely up to him. So, yeah, without him being as genuinely kind a person, this just could not have worked out. So, when we start part 4, she goes to see her mother. And just really have to say thank you, Jeet, for bringing her back down to earth. Because she gets so... This is the thing. Ashleigh gets really shaken up at this encounter. And I think that a lot of people would relate to this. You can be very aware that your parent was like borderline abusive to you in an intellectual sense, you can talk about it with your therapist and really come to understand that's what was happening. And yet, when you are in their presence and they explain to you why they were the way they were, it all seems to not matter. All of the progress that you've made on understanding this doesn't seem to factor in anymore. And you just feel bad for feeling angry, you know? And that's just a really common reaction. I know that when I was in therapy, I did this where we had like a sort of moment where I was basically like talking shit about my dad. And the next time that I came in, I got sort of like defensive about him and was like, I wasn't really fair. He was really good in other ways. And my therapist had to stop me and be like, you're allowed to be upset about how he treated you in a lot of different cases. That you don't have to come in here and justify things to me. And it's just an impulse that we have. We as children are trained to have a loyalty to our parents in a lot of ways that can be so hard to break, even when they 100% deserve it. And the way that her mother manipulates her here is so especially insidious, because I don't believe the lady even realizes what she's doing. Not to say that she isn't aware of being a manipulator and doesn't do that on purpose a lot of the time. But in this case, with this particular conversation, in this moment of the conversation, the whole thing where she extracts the information about Mbali, that's definitely manipulation, and that's a conscious thing she's doing. But here, where she's talking about how she like gave her daughter a wonderful childhood and she wanted for nothing, I think she genuinely believes that and genuinely doesn't understand how her daughter can feel slighted in any way. And this is something that I feel especially will resonate to children of immigrants. As someone whose father was an immigrant and whose father grew up in a really bad situation in Colombia, really poor, I think my father had a lot of this going on, where he had grown up without much in the way of material possessions. And he had a father who was a drunk and who beat him. And as far as my father was concerned, he provided everything we needed and he didn't beat us. And that was as good as it got. You know, for him, that was just being like an A+ father. And he didn't understand that there was still something missing there. Because as far as he was concerned, I had it so much better than he ever could have dreamed of having, that there's like almost a resentment against your child sometimes, I think, that they can't understand. Like it's a simultaneous thing where the parent wants their kid to grow up in better circumstances, but also feels like angry that their child will never truly appreciate what they've done for them. And yet you're glad they can't truly appreciate it because that means that they would have to suffer like you did. But it feels frustrating from the outside to know they're just never going to really have a complete understanding or frame of reference for it, you know? So I have sympathy for being in that position. And I think a lot of people, and I say the children of immigrants specifically, because I feel like that culturally can be a really big division. But I think that parents who grew up in bad circumstances, whether they're an immigrant or not, also can like kind of pull this card, you know? And it really works on Terasai. Her mother calls her ungrateful, disloyal. When Terasai asks her mother to say her name, her mother won't and acts like really disappointed that Terasai would even ask that. And it like basically insinuates, well, being maid of me isn't good enough for you. And like, no, it's not. She's a fucking person. She shouldn't just be relegated to being a part of you. And she has to say that later on to win. So, yeah, she is continuing to visit her mother and feeding her scraps of information without realizing that's what she's doing. And I don't think anybody was surprised when her telling her mother about Mbali and Thaddeus comes back to bite her in the ass, because it was just like, how was it going to come back to bite her in the ass? That was the only thing that I couldn't figure out, because her mother says something about how I'm not in a position to spread gossip. And I'm like, well, that's true. And I don't think that the servants don't already know. That's not, like, the knowledge of it isn't really a weapon at this point. I feel like that seems to be something that, you know, it's like an open secret. But using them actively against one another, that was inspired, honestly. So we have the actual day of the judgment that she is supposed to be sentencing her mother to death. And when she goes up there, this is great because, you know, as readers, I think that we can sort of piece together a lot of the time what is coming based on like the various thoughts that a character has had if we're inside their head. But what Terasai decides to do when she goes up for her first ruling comes as a genuine surprise. I know that she had sent for this woman to come in and testify, but I could not figure out how that would even work, what she was going to ask of her. And not only does Terasai refuse to sentence her mother as her first judgment, she abolishes the Unity Edict, which is just such an incredibly ballsy move. Like, that kind of courage, it's the kind of thing I wish to have. I hope that I would, you know, but you're standing up there with the full knowledge that you are going to make the most powerful man in the nation really angry at you. That you're already dancing on a knife's edge as far as he is concerned because of who you are related to. That this could be perceived as a kind of treason in some ways. Like, it can't legally be, but a lot of people would not appreciate the way that this was handled. And doing it in front of everyone, which is like simultaneously to her advantage because it can't be undone publicly when everybody has witnessed how legally it was carried out. But also it makes it all the more disrespectful in its way because it's in front of everybody on purpose. All of it just adds up to her being such a fucking gangster in that moment. I was genuinely shocked and like blown away. This, for me, is even more intense somehow than her trying to sacrifice herself via lodestone travel later. Although, that is incredibly intense. This feels... because she hadn't planned to flee after this, right? So, the lodestone thing, it was like, well, I may die, but at least I gave him my best shot. Where there's something about that I'm like, well... the feeling of like, well, I may die. Yeah, you're making a sacrifice, but you're also not going to have to deal with consequences afterwards. Like, that's sort of like you're out. But doing this with the edict, she's going to have to continue to like live in the palace and be around the emperor after all of this and know that he could make her life miserable in any number of ways. And it's just, there is a willingness to live miserably. And I feel like that counts for more in my mind in a lot of ways. That's a tough thing to be willing to do, you know? So I just fucking loved that so much. And I was so surprised. And I'm just not used to being surprised. It doesn't happen often. All of this book felt so incredibly fresh to me. And even though it ends in such a way that she's obviously setting up sequel books, which I don't know if they're out yet already or not. Ashleigh can let me know. But the setup for the sequels doesn't feel like, oh boy, we're going to have more of the same. The setup for the sequel, I am dying to read because it's going to be completely different. She's an empress now. The circumstances are wildly changed after all of this. And she has to create a council out of leaders of the other realms. which is just such an incredibly tall order anyway, just to to get them to agree. But it requires an emotional connection that cannot be forced. That is not something that you can artificially create. How does she do it? I truly cannot imagine. And does she succeed? Because she may be sacrificed anyway, and perhaps she manages to come out of it and live the way that Wu-In did, despite everything. But she would still be changed forever. Ashleigh says the second book is out and it's only a duology. Oh my God. I don't know. I just assumed it'd be a trilogy, and the fact that it's only a duology is desperately sad. I want a lot more of this universe. I really want more. Okay, look, I really respect, again, that this author has decided to make it a duology. Because let's face it, there are a lot of fucking trilogies out there that did not need to be trilogies, kids. Really, really, really a lot of them. They just get padded out in a way that's unnecessary and a drag. So props, because that is not something that a lot of authors are willing to do, is to shorten a story because it really requires it, rather than, making it a trilogy just to sell more books. And I'm not mad at wanting to sell books. People have to make a living. But this, to me, points to somebody who cares a lot more about the integrity of the story. And that's just says it all. And I think that it's very evident in the way the first book unravels. Ashleigh, have you read the second book already? I'm curious about your overall thumbs up or thumbs down if you've read it already. I just was wondering. You don't have to give anything away, obviously, but so yeah, I just had to talk about completely doing away with the Unity Edict. And I love that she has this woman come in, and I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the exact page. I can't remember her name, but she basically accuses Thaddeus of causing a disruption in a marriage because she's fighting with her husband about what to name their child. And they wouldn't be having this fight if it weren't for the edict, which was giving an incentive to naming your child after an Erit name, I think it is, right? And it's just, this is 100% from Terasai's, her understanding of the law. And that's what I find so impressive here, is that she clearly did her research and figured out how this was going to work. And it's because it's her first ruling, it can never be undone, which truly is a stroke of genius. I love that that's the tradition, and I love that she used it for this. It's just all so beautifully done. So in that, I did skip over something which is supposed to be the discovering of, first of all, files on the lady, but also files on the Empress who was erased. And she's doing a lot of research in the library on this. And as she's looking through papers and finding information about her mother's ruling, because she's still working from the assumption that she's going to have to figure out something with that, Kira comes in and she is offering to help because she doesn't agree with the Emperor's decision to make her execute her own mother. That's really, in summary, what it is. She won't be actually committing the act, but yeah, she will be. And Kira's really having a hard time with the fact that she feels such loyalty to the throne in so many ways, but also just deeply disagrees with it, to the point of being kind of shocked that the Emperor would even suggest it because it's so cruel. And this is just such a recurring theme in this book, is people who have a deep loyalty to a structure a system of power, struggling to reconcile what they're seeing in front of their eyes with what they believe that system is supposed to be. And in that way, it's really interesting how much Terasai represents like whiteness, considering that she is a black character, but she comes from a position of great privilege in so many ways, and doesn't realize exactly what she's gone through is like due to the desire to maintain that power structure. It looks like the lady wants to like undermine it. But when you get right down to it, she didn't. She had the option to change the way things were going to operate, but that would have cost her her power, and she wasn't willing to do it. And honestly, the lady for me feels a lot like Democrats. That, like, look, Republicans are wildly unjust and stuck in the past, and yeah, I'm going to just say that. It's fine. But Democrats are barely better. It's like almost embarrassing how barely they are. They still want to uphold the same systems. They're like, liberals are part of the same system and just so frustrating in so many ways. And the lady feels like that to me, where she is doing something because she personally feels this injustice, but it's all about her. And when it comes to the actual like changing of the world, if that's going to cost her anything, she won't be doing it. It's just not on the table. And Terasai is the radical. Terasai is out here like, oh no, we just got to undo this. Like, none of this can continue as it is. And that's a really scary thing. People are not up for that, Initially, when she brings the news to Dio about what the treaty actually consists of, and Dio doesn't think that there's an alternative, and he's just like, we have to let children be born as redemptors all over instead of just in Songland. Even though that's 100% fair, even just those 5 minutes of people thinking that's how it's going to work, they are flipping out in the room, like in the audience. And I don't think that the lady was wrong in saying that this would have undermined her power completely and made it so that she wouldn't be crowned. I think that she was actually right on point with the overall reception that news would bring, because the lady would never even consider sacrificing herself. That's just so not going to be on the table, like she is so focused on what's been like, how she's been wronged, that preventing that wrong from happening to others is just a really distant theoretical thought. And I just hope to never reach that place where I lose sight of the bigger picture and other people who are harmed because of my own baggage with what has happened to me personally. And it should be mentioned that when, like, earlier when Terasai is talking to her mother, and Terasai just tells her, like, Win found your journal and he knows that you were lying, the lady immediately, like, she's unsettled, but she goes right into, oh, but he'll forgive me because he loves me. She just takes it so completely for granted, And I don't think he would forgive her. However, he wasn't intending to kill her. When we get to that part later, that wasn't like, he was just trying to fuck with her and make a point. But killing her, he still cared about her too much to do that. And personally, I'm fine with it. Like, it's, oh God, there's so much happening. So we have this bit in the library where they are, first of all, we find out that Kira is hooking up with Woo-In, and not like fully, they're not having sex, but they were making out, and she's definitely got a thing for him. And later on, she gets sent to Songland, and it's very clear why she's the one being sent. And then they like are trying to, because the studies take place over the course of several days. And she is discovering that that Ayatoro's drum may be part of the equation. And when she slaps it and it doesn't have much of a sound to it, it's not as resonant as she would expect. My immediate thought was like, oh, okay, there's something inside the drum. But she does not put that together for a while. Eventually she does, and what's inside the drum are the two masks that prove that there was supposed to be an empress and a princess who have the ray also. So I am into it. I really enjoy that it's inside this instrument that's meant for storytelling. She tries to play it in order to see if that helps with like pulling memories out of the drum. And it just keeps playing in its own pattern without her. And that is the thing that I thought was really neat. The idea of a drum just playing on its own. That feels very sort of spooky to me. I find drums, or just even a beat with no other sound, to be highly unnerving sometimes. When I was a kid and I watched Jumanji and they have that drum sound right before something begins to happen, that really scared me as a kid. And then the other night, Owen and I were watching one, I don't remember which, but one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And they have like one of those sort of magnetic pendulums to make sound that is very steady to get you into a sort of hypnotic state. And oh my God, just that pendulum, it was so creepy. And so as much as this is supposed to be like, this drum is supposed to be it's assistance, right? It's the help of, I'm trying to show you where to look for the clue here. It's still, I kept thinking about how unsettling it would be to actually be in the room with it. So I also enjoy that there are some rumors beginning to circulate about the fact that Terasai is pregnant with Sanjit's child, and they've been sort of sequestered so that nobody will see the pregnancy, and that they can pass off their love child as Dio's child. And I wondered, now that she's an empress, does she get to, like, she sleeps with Sanji later. Like, they have sex for the first time. And it doesn't, like, everybody is aware of it. All of the council members come in and the two of them are, like, naked in bed, and they all go to bed together and it's fine. Nobody seems to care. Dio, obviously, he never really wanted that between them. But is that part of her being an empress? Like, how much of the rule book for empresses is even still around, considering that we were just pretending that couldn't be a thing at all for quite a while? Can we dig out those rules, or have they been destroyed? Because I wouldn't be surprised if they had been destroyed. So, all right, we have the big event here. I'm going to, let's see. Oh my God, I love this. What if you found the Empress and Princess masks? Dio asks. He knows everything already and is like really trying to make it clear he would be okay with this, and tells her, I trained my whole life to be emperor, but deep down I knew you could do it better. And she says that isn't true because of what a genuinely good person he is. And he's like, yeah, fair, but you bring a strength to everything. We were meant to be a team. I swear that you won't break your promise again, that you won't leave. This isn't our parents' story. And I love that line so much because, like it or not, all of us tend to absorb and play out aspects of our parents' baggage. It's just unavoidable if you have any sort of relationship with your parents and any understanding of their circumstances growing up and the way they see the world. And it can be something that really is difficult to internalize, that it isn't your job to like fix whatever happened with them. Because like I said in the first episode with her mother being like, I want a child that does literally whatever I say. A lot of parents like kind of treat their children and raise them with the understanding that that is their job, to sort of right the wrongs that have been done them, or live the life their parent wanted but couldn't have, you know. And even if you know intellectually that's not your job as their child, it's really hard to shake that and feel like it isn't at least a fragment of how you should be considering your choices. So let's see, I'm trying to find the start of this. So when she disbands the Unity Edict, the entire crowd begins to cheer for her and chant her name. And it is a moment of genuine shock for her because she isn't sure how everyone is going to react. And the Emperor, of course, is about to like have her seized and do some shit. And the Thaddeus has to step in and be like, hey, buddy, everybody's watching you. And everybody's cheering for her. So like you deciding to inflict punishment on the one that's the darling of the people in front of them isn't going to really win you any hearts right now. Maybe don't do it. And as much as the Emperor hates this, he lets it go for the moment. Obviously, it is not over yet. So she goes, it's right after this that she goes and finds the masks. She like, all of a sudden it clicks into place in her mind and she figures out where they are. And when she's talking, to Sanji later, she says, Thaddeus will change my ruling. It'll take him a while, but he'll find a way to reverse it. I haven't accomplished anything. And I'm like, disagree. I definitely get what she's saying. I'm not saying she's wrong that he'll find a way to reverse it. But I think doing this in front of everyone the way that she did, it gave the people a voice and some hope that there is someone in a position of power who gives a shit about their traditions, about their homelands and their culture, you know. I don't think that's nothing. And Thaddeus reversing it, like, that's going to be some bad PR. It's just, I think she did something. It's not a complete fix, but, and like, as we wind up seeing, Thaddeus is in no position to reverse it later. So it winds up being very good for her. But yeah, at this point, she gets interrupted by Kira, who says the Emperor has sentenced the lady to death. He's taken her back to heaven where she will be executed on the hour. And she goes to get into the like, what do you call it? The execution like area, the main area, which is supposed to be just for like the Emperor and his council. And she has to steal the memories of a guard so that he'll forget his orders and let her in, which I thought was great. And Olugbade in this scene is so well written. I cannot get enough of this author. I swear to God, I love her so much. Oh God. The last time I've been so thrilled with a story was Cradle. Like, this is right up there for me. He is so fake kind and patronizing. He isn't, like, he's obviously boiling with rage. Like, he is definitely hugely angry and resentful, but he cloaks it completely in this, like, false compassion and mercy, which is so infuriating. You should have stayed away. When Olugbade turned to face me, his tone was maddeningly gentle. A child should not oversee the death of her parent. I see that now. The stress of such a decision caused your misbehavior, so tomorrow you'll revoke your ruling and express your apologies, and then I think you must be sent away for a while. A young girl must be given space to grieve. Oh my God, I hate you so much. And when she says that you can't kill her, she hasn't had a trial, he's like, yeah, I didn't need a trial. I was just trying to see how you would behave. And I got exactly what I expected. She is her mother's daughter, and you just had to be a little bitch about it. And the way that they are trying to execute her mother is with arrows. And they release, and the arrows hover in the ground inches from her skin before falling to the floor. Now, unclear here, is this Wu-in? Because initially, I thought this was Wu-in. And it does turn out that he's like hovering right nearby. But I couldn't tell if that was him or if this was like part of her being, having her counsel and the Ray, and that this particular method of murder wasn't going to work. But it's because, it's one thing for her to be struck with the arrows and then she just doesn't die of them. But it's another thing for them to not strike her at all. And that's not how it is presented, I feel like, in theory, because when Terasai is talking to Sanjit at one point, she says, like, well, he just will go through all the different ways of possibly killing her until he hits on one that she's not protected from. And even if she doesn't die, she'll be hurt and it'll be torture. And I can't believe that she's going to have to go through that and that he'd be willing to go through that. And so I'm like, well, if the arrows won't land, and what if they tried to like beat her and beating wasn't the thing either? Would your fists not land either on her? Like, I'm just very curious about how this works. I don't know. It's not really explicitly said. The lady asks, am I still a fake brother? So that implies to me that it's her Ray. And as far as she's concerned, that's proof that it was the Ray. But also it could be Wu-in and she's just playing the optics of it for the sake of the audience, and to get one over on him. I wouldn't put that past her at all. It's unclear. But I would be interested. Ashleigh is saying it's her Ray, but then followed it up with, I think, ellipses. But yeah, I am. Oh, and Ashleigh says, I was surprised he said that aloud. I wonder if his intimacy issues still linger and he doesn't communicate often using the Ray. I missed when you typed that up, Ashleigh. Are you referring to Dio saying out loud that the masks exist? And that it was like kind of a dangerous thing to say out loud. But okay, so this is when the Emperor is like, all right, fine, poison. We'll do that. We'll give that one a try. And he poisons a blade of a knife. And she, at this point, says, I submit to you, brother. And what I found fun here is that she is immune to poison. So if he had tried this, this would also not have worked. He would have been embarrassed yet again. And I kind of would have liked to see that. But it doesn't go that far. She asks for basically the last rites, essentially, of their culture. And Mbali has to give them. And as Mbali is doing it, and apologizes to the lady. She's like, I didn't want it to be like this. The lady grips her up and holds her over the edge of the tower. And she basically is like, Thaddeus is going to have to decide. She doesn't say this out loud, but this is what is being implied here because she knows about their relationship. And this moment, Mbali tells Thaddeus don't do it. And Thaddeus is, he doesn't even like, there's a moment where they converse and she's like, you know that you think there's order and not justice. And he's like, yeah, but you don't believe that. The lady loosens her grip a little and he loses it. And his his heat power explodes out of him. And Terasai gets a look at some of his memories and basically sees that he grew up in a really impoverished and crime-ridden area and longs for stability. And so him saying that there isn't justice, there's only order, is coming from a place of seeing true disorder and seeing how bad it can get if things aren't kept on lock. And there's just some understanding there, like figuring out where he's coming from and his motivations. And Thaddeus swivels around and pushes the Emperor over the edge of the tower. And the lady fumbles in surprise and drops Mbali. And I swear I really thought Mbali was dead. Genuinely was like, oh, that sucks. I was super bummed because, who doesn't like Mbali? But as it turns out, no. One body hits the ground. But Uin manages to save Mbali. And he shows up and the lady is like, oh shit, you're back. I knew that, and Wuin's like, I came back to fuck you up a little bit. And he takes a knife and slices her cheek and is like, so now you're marked like I am and you can remember how you tried to screw us and Songland is absolutely not going to help you. And she looks at him and sees the blood and knows like, oh my God, you fucking killed me. And he doesn't know. He is very it's one of those moments where this is not what he intended to do. And he obviously regrets it. But I can't help but think when he finds out later about how deep her betrayal was, that he probably feels like it was for the best in the end, It's just that it not being purposeful sort of undermines that in a lot of ways. But in the moment, Terasai is calling him a murderer and a monster, and he's just saying, I didn't know. And he carries her off in the air, flying, and they get shot at, and he gets hit with an arrow. She gets sliced, but doesn't get fully hit. And they wind up in Songland. And we get, he grows so weak that they are grounded in a storm because Songland has a built-in protection where these storms fly up in response to people entering the land when they are not invited, which is pretty rad, to be honest. And let's see. Ashleigh, sorry, she says, no, the Emperor, when they say that it'd be a bad idea to take action against her there. Oh, saying it out loud. Yeah, I guess that's just for the sake of the story, for us to understand why they wouldn't take action right there. Ashleigh says, I guess this is probably proof earlier that the arrows were due to the ray because the Emperor had the knife dipped in poison afterwards, so he would have seen that. Dipped in poison after what? Because the knife, it was because it was wielded by somebody from her council. I'm not sure. Sorry, Ashleigh, I'm not following you. So she winds up running into the child that got sacrificed, Yun, who did make it back out. And this child has no fucking time for Terasai. And honestly, I can't be mad at that. This is one of those things where this is when black people are having a problem with white people and white people are like, I didn't do the thing. This is not on me. No, not personally, perhaps, but you're part of it. You're helping keep this bullshit going. And it might not be you making a particular choice to cause this harm, but you are a cog in this machine. And not only do you seem not fully aware of the harm you're doing, But once you begin to find out, you don't take a bold stance to help when you know what's at stake, you know? And so that anger, as much as it feels unjustified to white people who feel like I'm being blamed for the sins of my ancestors, you're not really. Like, partially, like, some of that is the resentment of history, but a lot of it is just the resentment of current reality. And I don't think a lot of white people understand that. So they take it really personally when the anger isn't actually that personal that's being directed toward them. And it's part of, like, Black people feel, and rightly so, that they are not allowed to be individuals. They have to represent their entire race every time they do anything, because they are so deeply stereotyped and not trusted by white people that they have to constantly prove that they're not the stereotype. But white people get to be individuals. We get to be troubled. We get to be misunderstood if we do something wrong, if we commit fucking murder or like a mass shooting. And so when we are seen as part of the monolith of whiteness, we don't know how to fucking handle that, because we are never put in that position societally. We are always allowed to be who we are. And so the feeling of being lumped in with the rest of whiteness is foreign and uncomfortable, because that shouldn't be how it is for anybody. But we don't really get that at all. And so this whole thing with Yeon being like, bitch, I do not feel sorry for you. Like, we don't need you. Like, what are you even doing here? I couldn't help but be like, yeah, okay, that's fair. Let's see. Sorry, Ashleigh says, after they tried killing her with the arrows, that was when they dipped the knife in poison. So if Win was there to protect her from the arrows, he would have seen the knife dipped in poison and would have known it would kill her. I guess that he would. Yeah, because like I was going to say Win wasn't in sight line, but he doesn't have to be. We know that he can use the wind to like basically eavesdrop. And the Emperor says out loud, well, poison will do it then. So he would have heard. So yeah, you're right. It had to have been the ray that just stopped the arrows. Thank you, Ashleigh. I appreciate that. So Win takes her to the same place that he took the lady years and years ago. And as it turns out, this is like a place that only royalty is supposed to come. He is a prince, as we find out. And because of his role as a sacrificial lamb who comes back, he gets basically disowned. As much as one would expect that the children who make it and survive would be welcomed back by families who were sad to lose them, we find out that's not actually how it works. The families don't want the kids back. They find it really unnerving to be around children who have basically been to hell and back, and they don't want anything to do with them. It's like a combination of seeing them as like a bad luck charm, and also the like psychological aspect of having mentally let go of these kids and come to terms with the grieving process, and then they return, and now you have to like undo that, but also you do still need to grieve them because they're not the same kid they were when they left, and people just don't know how to fucking cope. So Win takes her to this area that it's called, let's see, the Heart of Sagimsan. Every blue vein you've seen in the mountain finds its source in this room. I can't read that wall, but you can. Focus and listen. And as it turns out, this is a shadow of Am in here. It is a god, essentially, or at least like the reflection, the memory of a god. And this is when she finds out how exactly everything was settled with Inoba the Perfect. A brother and sister, both warriors, watched their homeland being torn to pieces. Inoba was brave, but Wuraola was wise. She saw how division weakened humans. When she told Inoba, he enslaved an Alagbato, demanding the power to unite 12 realms. So he did the same thing that the lady did. And it's fucking Melu. Like, it seems like it's the actual same Alagbato. Alagbato, yeah. Which, I'm sorry, Melu, that this just keeps happening to you. This fucking sucks. And this is how the lady figured out that she could do it, was watching this memory. So Enoba does all of these things to try and unite the land, and it keeps on not quite being enough. So Enoba asked for the power to rule an empire for eternity. For this gift, the Eru climbed to the heavens and stole 2 rays from the blazing sun. And so this is where the ray comes from and all of that. His ray caused him to outlive Wuraola, and though he mourned her, his pride scrubbed her from the earth, because he fucking eats both rays himself, which is truly just such a fucking dude move, honestly. Ugh, disgusted. So, under the treaty, monsters from the underworld disappeared from the continent. Redemptor children were born in every realm. But after years of parents wailing in the streets, the Arat people began to resent the emperor. He feared a rebellion. So hoping to mollify his subjects, he returned to the Eru and demanded his last wish, a way to ensure that only children from Songland and never children from Aratsar would be selected as Redemptors. And this is held in place by the treaty being sealed by a drop of blood from every ruler. So long as the blood was equal, no realm drew the short straw. The Redemptor curse favored no realm, but now that Enoba had united 11 souls to his own, his blood held the power of 12 realms. He had added, so to speak, longer straws to the game. When the continent gathered again to renew the treaty, Enoba's blood supplemented the power of the 12, stacking the odds against Songland. Ever after, no Redemptors were born in Aratsar. So, his power, because he has, like, you know, he basically, he's got, like, super-powered blood. And he is the tiebreaker. And he knows he's doing that, but he doesn't tell anybody. And it does seem suspicious to everyone. Like, Songlanders immediately begin to be like, wait, what the fuck? But there's no way to prove it because nobody knows exactly how this works. And it just seems like, well, you guys have just got really bad luck. You must be cursed, you know. And it's just, again, one, like, such a good representation of the system, you know, and the fact that, yeah, somebody way back decided to do something despicable, and they sort of muddied the waters on how it actually worked. And then that tradition was carried forward for hundreds of years without question, because people just trusted that the original person who put these rules in place knew what they were doing. And oh my God, is there any better fucking metaphor for, like, how the United States works? They're like, just Jesus, seriously. Enoba's secret died with him, but every 100 years his curse on Songland is restored when Enoba's descendants spill their blood into Enoba's shield. And she comes out of this sort of trance, and she tells Wuin exactly what the fuck is going on. And he is, like, horrified, but also not totally surprised. And she's like, maybe she tries to be generous to her mother's intentions. Maybe Mother was trying to right the scale. She anointed you, didn't she? The storyteller's memory described the treaty renewal like drawing straws. But thanks to you, Mother's blood represents Songland as well as Aratsar. If her blood fell in Enoba's shield, the treaty renewal would be fair again. Wuin considered, then shook his head slowly. She never meant to anoint me, he whispered, and once she did, she tried her hardest to erase my blood from her veins. So then we get her reading his memories and the flashback of her mother manipulating him actively into loving her by rescuing him, giving him a place to belong. And then when he asks to be anointed, after she's seen this vision, clearly she doesn't want to do it, but she thinks to herself about being able to find other people whose blood will outweigh his. Let's see where I'm trying to find the spot where Isokan blood would balance it. Several strains from different realms. It's a risk, but it could work. There's still room on my council. I need only find the right ones. Yes, it's worth a try. So what I find interesting here is that her assumption, and I say this is like with the awareness that Dio's edict that now the Redemptor children are going to have to come from every realm really obviously riled the people up. And I don't think she would have been wrong about their reaction. I say that with the assumption that she'd make an announcement at all. But everybody has assumed for a while that Songland is just accidentally somehow unlucky. And if she didn't say anything and Redemptor children just began to be born all over the place again, I really wonder how that would shake out. I feel like people would probably assume it was something to do with her and that she had screwed them somehow, but there wouldn't be a real way to prove that, and it would just be a return to how things had been, and maybe it wouldn't wind up being quite as catastrophic, or at least not immediately catastrophic, as she is worried about. I don't know. But yeah, he, it says I tried to convince my mother to support her with Songland's army for years, but Minja always managed to talk her out of it. Of the two of us, my sister always had the brains. She tried to warn me about the lady, but I wouldn't listen. So Minja washed her hands of me. I don't blame her. So it turns out that like the entire council is Ahsokan's except for him and the first three, because she has been trying to wash his blood out of the equation. Which, this just, again, the blood thing, it's just such a beautiful metaphor. Like, just all of this, it's just so well done. Yeah, Ashleigh says, I feel like it'd be seen as being a curse because they now have an empress. That's what I was thinking, and I didn't say it because I just have so little time left. But yeah, Ashleigh, I think that's true. They would assume that this was punishment for having an empress and, flouting tradition, even though it's actually a return to tradition. So she has to consider what to do. And the only way to get back before the treaty is renewed is to take 26 lodestones, which will literally disintegrate her. And eventually, she goes to this temple and prays about it and actually hears a message. Do not ask how many people you will save. Ask to what world will you save them? What world, Wuraola, is worth surviving in? This is part of a dream, and she wakes up alone. And she's like, you know what? And she jumps on Hyung, the giant tiger, and rides off and goes through 26 lodestones and is actually falling apart by the time she reaches the palace. And she's trying. She really gave it her all, but she is falling apart. And then wakes up, and there is Melu, and she is whole again. And she thinks that she's dead. And Melu says, no, we are guardians of life. We're not in the underworld, and I'm not an Eru anymore. You have set us free. And she's like, no, I didn't. The lady was killed. And he tells her, and this is something that he didn't say, which I'm like kind of side-eyeing him for keeping this to himself, but he says, her ambition would have haunted us still, enslaving your mind forever until you found a purpose. Wanting to be loved was not enough. Devotion to your friends was not enough. but wanting justice, to carve out a new story for this world, no matter the cost, that was enough. No human's wish may rule you now. The story's not over yet. So she runs in and stops Dio, and the Abiku are standing there, and they're like, well, what are you planning to do then? And she offers up herself. And the Abiku are like, that's a great offer and everything, but you don't actually have a council, so your blood isn't really going to be like rich enough for us. So you're going to have to get a council. And not only are you going to have to get a council, but we want like a top tier gourmet locavore, farm to table council. So we're going to need you to make sure every single member of your council are from the leaders of the realms. And they give her 2 years to assemble this. And she makes the deal, and in response, they imprint her with the same tattoos all over her body of the map to the underworld. And I really like that touch. It didn't occur to me, but when it began to happen, I was like, oh shit, that makes sense. And that is the end of that arc. And we have the moment later on where she is figuring out how to assign different people. She sends Kira to Songland, and she has sex finally with Sanjeet. And then she sees one of the guards. She wakes up in the middle of the night, and it's Kathleen, who has shaved her head in mourning, which I've got to say, I'm glad that's not a thing. I'm glad we're not expected to shave our heads in mourning, guys. That sucks. And Kathleen is here to demand that she give an offering to try and call her mother's shade. And at first, she absolutely refuses. Kathleen says, she was your mother and she's dead, murdered. Don't you care? Of course I care, I shot back, but there's nothing I can do. And don't you dare say I owe her. I'm not like you. I didn't swear my life to her service. I didn't choose any of this. And Kathleen reins in her temper and is like, we have tried, and she's clearly waiting for you. And that's enough for Terasai. Of course, she is pretty susceptible to guilt, and she's like, oh, okay. So she summons her mother, and Kathleen embraces her, but her mother is like, yeah, I want to be alone with my daughter. And Kathleen's clearly like, oh, God damn it. So she leaves, but she's salty about it. And she doesn't apologize, but she says, essentially, clearly Dio isn't like his dad, which is as close as it's going to get. And she says something about how, all of this stuff was a game. I played it as best I could. And she says that my enemies think I have lost, but they are wrong. I said I would put an empress on the throne, and I have. Through you, my legacy lives. You didn't make me empress, I wanted to snap. You didn't make me who I am. I am not the sequel of your story. You did not give me my name. Instead, I leaned up and kissed her smooth cheek. I really like this. She's like, it's being made clear to us, the readers. Terasai isn't being fooled. She is making peace with her mother's shade in the moments that she has, but she's not really buying this fucking story. She is taking ownership of her own story. And that is what this is all about. The fact that her mother wouldn't call her by her name. By the end of this meeting, when she leaves, she calls her by her name, Terasai Idagio. And that is how the book ends, is her mother's shade departing and saying her name for the first time and granting her personhood in that. And it's just a shame that it takes her being literally dead for that to happen, but it happens. So I really enjoy this. This book was so good, you guys. I love it. And I know I wasn't able to do this like full justice, but I feel like I hit the major beats. Hopefully that is satisfactory. And I am hoping that eventually Ashleigh will be able to commission the next book. Nothing is open right now, but it will be soon. So fingers crossed. Thank you guys again so much for listening. And thank you to Ashleigh for... Ashleigh says, I feel like I redeemed myself a little after the last book commission. Poor Ashleigh. She commissioned a book that she hadn't read, but it was part of a series that we had liked. And it wound up being not good. But Ashleigh didn't know. She was just being optimistic because that author had been good so far. It's not your fault, Ashleigh. I don't blame you. Shit happens, man. But yeah, this was just really, what a rewarding story. I love this. I'm definitely going to be coming back to this story. I loved it. And also the audiobook is done really well. So if you're into audiobooks, I recommend it. All right, I am going to wrap them over time, but thank you again very much. I hope y'all enjoyed this as much as I did. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.